Long ago, at the beginning of human civilization, when kings listened to oracles and shamans guided people through the mysteries of life, the connection between humans and plants was seen as something sacred. Plants weren't just food or medicine. They were seen as bridges between the physical world and the spiritual one. In those ancient times, cannabis wasn't simply a plant, it was seen as a doorway. But like any doorway, it could lead into places of light or into darker parts of the soul. This leads us to an important question that very few people ask seriously today. What are the spiritual effects of using marijuana? We are not talking about the opinions of governments, the conclusions of official science, or the way pop culture either celebrates or criticizes it. Instead, we will look for answers in ancient traditions, sacred writings, and the experiences of mystics who dared to move beyond the smoke. This journey will take us across continents and through different eras, from ancient India to medieval Arabia, from Ethiopian churches to modern Rastafari gatherings. The goal is not to judge but to understand. Because cannabis, once deeply respected, has now become either criminalized, romanticized, or reduced to a trend. Yet in old traditions, it was seen as a sacred key. And keys have a purpose, not to be worshipped but to open doors. What matters is not just having a key, but knowing which door you are opening. In ancient India, for example, cannabis was considered one of the 5 sacred plants, a gift from the gods. It was believed to carry amrita, the nectar of immortality. Cannabis was linked to Shiva, the god who destroys illusions and creates new realities. Devotees of Shiva, known as sadhus, smoked cannabis during deep meditation. But they didn't do it just to feel good or to escape reality. They used it in rituals that included fasting, isolation, and chanting. Their goal was not to get high, but to reach ego death, the point where a person no longer identifies with their body and sees the deeper truth of existence. For them, cannabis was a tool for facing themselves, not for running away. In Taoism, the ancient spiritual philosophy of China, cannabis was also used, but with great care. Taoist masters believed that every plant had its own Shi, or life energy. When used correctly, cannabis could help refine the body's energy, helping people experience visions and lucid dreams. However, they warned that if a person's body and mind were not balanced, cannabis could cause even more confusion and chaos. It was seen as something that amplifies what is already inside you, whether good or bad. Like any amplifier, it could either create harmony or make things worse, depending on the user's inner state. In medieval Islamic culture, some Sufi mystics also used cannabis, especially in the form of hashish, during their spiritual practices. Their goal was to dissolve their egos and merge into the presence of God. Some mystical poems and stories tell of people experiencing divine visions after using cannabis. But even among Sufi masters, there was debate. The famous poet Rumi warned that you don't need drunkenness to find God because God already lives inside you. For the Sufis, cannabis could be a bridge to the divine, but if it became an addiction or a way of avoiding real spiritual work, it was seen as harmful. In Jewish mystical traditions like Kabbalah, cannabis isn't mentioned directly, but there are warnings about trying to force spiritual experiences without being properly prepared. The sacred book known as the Zohar says that those who try to open the gates of spiritual light without enough wisdom will end up lost in their own ignorance. In simpler terms, without preparation, even sacred plants can become traps rather than tools for growth. Some researchers suggest that early Christian groups like the Gnostics and Essenes used cannabis resins in their sacred oils and rituals. The Old Testament even mentions a plant called cannabism, which some scholars believe was cannabis. But again, the plant was never used casually. It was part of sacred rituals meant to prepare people for prophetic visions, not for recreation. In African and indigenous American traditions, plants have always been treated with deep respect. Whether it was cannabis, tobacco, ayahuasca, or peyote, plants were understood to be living beings with their own spirits. Shamanic cultures believe that you don't heal because of the plant itself. You heal because you connect to the spirit of the plant through ceremony and intention. If you use a sacred plant without understanding its spirit and purpose, it can do more harm than good. Even in the Rastafari movement, where cannabis or ganja is considered a sacred herb, it's not just smoked casually. It's used during reasoning sessions, gatherings where people pray, meditate, sing, and discuss spiritual truths. For them, the herb is a tool for wisdom, not for distraction. Across all these cultures and traditions, one clear idea repeats: cannabis is neutral. It is a tool. Like fire, it can warm you or burn you. It can lift you or drag you down. The outcome depends not on the plant, but on the user, their consciousness, their intention, their level of preparation. Ancient texts like the Corpus Hermeticum teach that true spiritual insight doesn't come easily to those who are drunk on themselves. Those who try to use shortcuts to enlightenment often find themselves trapped in circles of confusion. In the end, the real question might not be whether cannabis is sacred, but whether the person using is ready to approach it with sacredness. Because every plant that opens a door also holds up a mirror. And mirrors don't just show what's beautiful, they reveal everything, even the parts of ourselves we would rather not see. Cannabis can peel away the masks we wear, showing us our raw, unfiltered inner selves. But not everyone is ready to see what lies beneath the surface. The psychologist Carl Jung talked about the shadow, the hidden side of ourselves that holds all our fears, insecurities, and unhealed wounds. Many people who smoke cannabis experience anxiety, paranoia, or fear. But the plant isn't creating those feelings. It's revealing what was already buried inside. What we often call a bad trip is really the soul trying to heal by bringing hidden wounds into the light. Mystical traditions have long warned about this. Dion Fortune, an early 20th century occultist, wrote about how altered states, whether through drugs, ritual, or trauma, can weaken the protective layer around our spirit, making us vulnerable to negative energies. When consciousness fades, old wounds and suppressed emotions rush in. If you're not grounded, it can be overwhelming. Even in yoga traditions like Raja Yoga, there are warnings about using herbs to achieve spiritual powers called siddhis. Patanjali's Yoga Sutras explain that while these powers might seem exciting, they are actually distractions if they aren't accompanied by wisdom and ethics. They can feed the spiritual ego, a more dangerous form of pride that is harder to overcome than ordinary arrogance. Spiritual teachers like Osho said that while drugs can open doors to other dimensions, those doors are unstable. Walking through them without deep meditation and discipline often leaves people feeling lost and confused, not enlightened. On an energetic level, cannabis affects the aura, or the subtle field of energy that surrounds the body. Many healers, yoga practitioners, and spiritual seekers report feeling more sensitive after using cannabis. This sensitivity can be a gift if the person is grounded and balanced. But if they aren't, they can become like a bright light in the dark, attracting not only good energies but also harmful ones. Shamans often say, every plant that opens you also tests you. The test is not magical, it's ethical. What will you do with what you see? Will you run away, analyze it from a distance, or face it and change? Many longtime cannabis users talk about feeling stuck. They feel relaxed, but unmotivated. They feel creative, but rarely finish their projects. They feel spiritual, but their lives don't actually transform. Kabbalists would say that such people are trapped in clipit, layers of spiritual energy formed by incomplete experiences. These layers make people feel like they are growing, when in fact they are stuck. The biggest danger is mistaking emotional intensity for real spiritual progress. Feeling a lot doesn't mean evolving. Expansion without direction is just swelling, and swelling always leads to bursting. When used without awareness, cannabis stops being a sacred plant and becomes a tool of spiritual stagnation. Not because the plant is bad, but because the user is disconnected from the real work. Cannabis doesn't cause spiritual passivity. It simply fits easily into the lives of people who are already avoiding deep change. Some people argue, if I feel peaceful when I smoke, it must be helping me. But true peace isn't something that comes from an outside substance. True peace is something you build inside yourself, something that stays with you even when life gets difficult. If cannabis gives you peace, it's worth asking. Is it helping you build real inner strength, or is it just renting you a temporary escape? The real meeting with the divine almost always starts with the meeting of your own shadow. And that meeting is rarely pretty. It involves facing your fears, your anger, your sadness. But if you stay with those feelings, without running away, something real and lasting can begin to grow. Not a flashy vision, but a deep, quiet healing. Cannabis is like a pool of water. If you look carefully, it can show you the sky. But if you dive in without caution, you'll only stir up the mud at the bottom. And remember, no spiritual journey is truly solitary. Everything you experience is part of the larger human story. No ritual, no plant, no spiritual practice happens in isolation. We are all connected. In the end, cannabis, like every sacred plant, asks only one thing. What will you do with the door it opens? Everything that touches us leaves a mark on culture. And everything that culture accepts or rejects shapes how we see ourselves and the world. Cannabis is a good example of this. It is a plant that once had sacred meaning, but over time has become a global product, a pop culture symbol, a political topic, and a sign of rebellion for the young. But before any of that, long before laws or governments tried to control it, cannabis was something sacred. In some places, it still is. Take the Rastafari tradition, for example. In their culture, smoking cannabis, which they call ganja, isn't just about getting high. It's a spiritual act, a way to connect with God, whom they call Yah. The Rastafari movement began in Jamaica in the 1930s. It was a response to colonial rule and racism, but it was also a deep spiritual revival. Rastas believe that smoking ganja is a way to heal, to open the mind, and to stay close to God. When they gather to smoke together, it's not for entertainment. It's a ceremony. It's called a reasoning session, where they share deep conversations, listen to each other, and reflect on life. The smoke, the silence, the words, they all come together to create a sacred space. It's not just a personal experience, it's collective, shared with others. But the Rastafari are not the only ones who use cannabis in a sacred way. In many African cultures, especially among Bantu-speaking people, cannabis was used during important moments like celebrations, funerals, and initiation ceremonies. It wasn't used to run away from pain, but to face it. It wasn't about escaping life, but about being fully present. Cannabis helped people connect with their ancestors and with the spirit world. In the ancient Americas, even though cannabis didn't grow there, people had a similar relationship with sacred plants like peyote and ayahuasca. These plants were used in rituals guided by myths, songs, and elders who knew the spiritual way. The plants were never used casually. They were treated with great respect. Without ritual and community, the sacred use of plants loses its meaning and becomes just another way to get high. This is exactly what modern society has done. It took cannabis out of its sacred place and turned it into a product to sell. Today, it's often just another item on a store shelf, another meme on the internet, another TV show plot. What was once holy has been reduced to a brand. What was once a way to reach the divine has become marketing. In the 1960s, during the rise of psychedelic culture, there was a real effort to bring back the sacred use of plants. People were searching for new spiritual experiences. They wanted freedom, change, awakening. They listened to teachers like Alan Watts and Timothy Leary. They used cannabis along with LSD and other drugs. There was a true hunger for something deeper, but it often lacked roots. There was no tradition to hold them, no elders to guide them, no structure to help them make sense of what they experienced. Aldous Huxley had warned about this in his book, The Doors of Perception. He said that visions might show you great truths, but they don't teach you how to live. Seeing is not the same as understanding. Because of this, a big hole opened up in modern spirituality, a hole where people chase experiences without grounding, emotions without ethics, ecstasy without responsibility. Cannabis became a symbol of freedom, but not often a tool for true spiritual work. In traditions where cannabis is still sacred, it is always used with others, inside a ritual, with preparation and respect. No one smokes alone just to get high. There are prayers, songs, fasts. There is a sense of limits and purpose. The community creates a container for the sacred experience. The individual steps out of their ego and into something larger. Cannabis has a cultural soul. It reflects the meaning we give it. If it is used inside a sacred circle, it can open doors. If it is used alone in a dark room, it can deepen loneliness. Like water, it takes the shape of its container. And sadly, today's cultural container is often shallow, rushed, and distracted. But not all is lost. In indigenous communities around the world, there are still people who guard the old ways. There are young people who are reclaiming rituals, fasting, and singing. There are teachers, even in the middle of noisy cities, who show how to use the plant in prayer and reverence. The plant hasn't changed. The context has. The intention has. The question is, what will we choose to create around it? Cannabis teaches us something very important. Spirituality is not just a feeling inside you. It is a vibration you share with others. It's not just about what visions you have while you're high. It's about who you become when you come down. Real spiritual growth is not about chasing lights and highs. It's about living with presence, compassion, and depth in everyday life. There is an ancient African saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Spirituality is a journey better taken with others, with drums, fire, prayer, community. Real spiritual growth is not measured by what you experience in altered states, but by how you live when the plant's effects are gone. Without clear thinking, without discernment, what ancient Greeks called crow and Indians call viveka, cannabis can easily trick us. It can create illusions. We may think we are having deep insights, but they could just be echoes of our own desires. We may believe we are seeing visions, but we might only be seeing what we want to see. There is a type of intoxication that feels like clarity, but is actually confusion. Synchronicities, strange coincidences, vivid dreams, they feel meaningful. But if they don't lead to better relationships, deeper kindness, real change, they are just flashes. Pretty, but without real direction. The true spiritual path is harder. It asks for patience, discipline, silence, and everyday presence. Without those, cannabis can lead to a subtle form of addiction, not just to the plant, but to the feeling of being spiritual without doing the work. It's easy to sound wise while high. It's much harder to stay kind, patient, and awake during the struggles of daily life, in traffic, in arguments, when facing pain. True enlightenment isn't about the visions you have with your eyes closed. It's about how you act with your eyes open. It's about your courage, your compassion, your honesty in the real world. In some ancient mystical teachings, there is a warning about the false light. It feels like mental clarity, but doesn't lead to true change. Cannabis, if used without discipline and wisdom, can feed that false light. It can make us believe we are progressing, when really, we are just spinning in circles, lost in beautiful illusions. That's why traditional societies always combine sacred plants with rituals, fasting, prayer, preparation, and guidance. It wasn't because they were superstitious. It was because they knew the dangers of walking through spiritual doors unprepared. They understood that portals aren't places for sightseeing. They are places of real transformation, and not everyone is ready for what lies beyond. Cannabis carries possibilities, not guarantees. It can be a light or a fog, depending on how it's used. The key is the awareness you bring to it. Are you using it to wake up or to escape? Are you present or lost? Osho once said that anything, even something ordinary, can become a meditation if you are present. And anything, even something sacred, can become just another drug if you are absent. It's not the plant that decides. It's you. Used without wisdom, cannabis can become a mirror covered in mist, where the ego mistakes itself for the awakened soul. Real spiritual work asks more from us. It asks for consistency, humility, courage, and service. It asks for integration, not just insights. Cannabis can offer you a glimpse, but it's up to you to turn that glimpse into a path. It can show you a reflection, but you have to decide what to do with what you see. Enlightenment is not just about feeling good during a high. It's about building a life of presence and compassion afterward. If you feel called to explore cannabis as a sacred tool, do it with clear intention. Do it with preparation. Do it with humility. And above all, do it in connection with others who can support your journey. Because in the end, spirituality is not about chasing lights, it's about becoming a light.